Welcome to the Entrepreneurial CEO Podcast, where we dive into the real stories behind building and scaling a business. Each episode, we sit down with CEOs, founders, and leaders to uncover hard-won lessons in leadership, systems, and team building. Listen in each week to learn directly from real business leaders who have been in your shoes, had success, made the mistakes, and all of the messiness that comes with building a business. If you're ready to learn from real-world leaders and gain insights you can apply today, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Raleigh, thanks so much for being here, man. All right. Everybody, today's guest is Raleigh Taylor. He's the CEO of Premier Protective Security, PPS, one of the largest manned security enterprises in the U.S. Raleigh has led PPS through rapid national expansion. They're combining people, process, and technology, and which I really want to hear more about with AI and tech and how that's all woven into the company to deliver 24/7 security solutions across the U.S. Raleigh has an interesting background, spans logistics, corporate operations, and also strategic leadership at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And he's brought that to the company now at PPS and really brought operational rigor and his leadership. Under his guidance, PPS has become known not just for protecting clients, but for building stronger communities and bridging that gap between law enforcement and the public. I'm super excited to learn more about how you guys have grown this business and what you're seeing now, especially in sort of the environment of the U.S. and how you're also weaving in AI and tech to really scale the company. So thank you very much for being here, and we appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm excited about the conversation.
Yeah. So before I ask you a whole bunch of questions, maybe just, is there anything else you want to tell us about the company or about yourself?
Yeah, look, I think you summed it up pretty accurately, right? We provide armed, unarmed officers kind of throughout the United States. So you figure we span from retail, distribution centers, warehouses, Class A buildings. We do some executive protection as well. And then we, kind of have a suite of services, right? That's pretty comprehensive when we think about security, kind of backing into robotics and open source intelligence, et cetera. And so the industry is evolving pretty quickly. And so we ensure that we have the ecosystem to be able to provide the services that our clients are looking for. So yeah, that's kind of us in a nutshell.
I'm super excited, and I don't want to get off the rails too quickly, but I want to learn more about how robotics is weaving in, just because I see this stuff with like Elon Musk and Tesla and how they're working on or maybe debuting this new robotics. I don't even know what they call it. I don't know when that's actually coming to market, but I wonder if there's certain things like that you're going to have in your portfolio in the future. But maybe just to start, how did you get involved with PPS? And how did you identify that this was like the opportunity that you wanted to be a part of and lead?
Yeah, honestly, it was kind of by an accident, to be very candid with you. I as you mentioned, I ran a trucking company for a number of years. We exited to a strategic back in either 2020, 2021. And then I joined the United States Chamber of Commerce as an advisor there and did some kind of in parallel paths, some restructuring work with a restructuring firm. And as the project that I was working on kind of came to a close, and this was kind of a weird period in everyone's lives, which was COVID, an intermediary kind of came across and said, hey, there's a security company when I think there could be a potential transaction either between you or between, the company and any of your resources or your contacts, right? And so the interesting part about PPS at the time is they were providing security services for a number of kind of trucking verticals. And so the thought is that it was kind of synergistic to, either my experience or people within my Rolodex. And candidly, it was not, to be very, very clear. But it was worth a conversation because, I knew of a lot of kind of financial investors who, were generally looking for, EBITDA positive organizations that were, sort of commercial service oriented. So I said, look, I'll lead the diligence on the business, just get a feel for the owners, get a feel for, the operation and the financials, and I'll figure out who it makes sense to kind of send it to. And so after having that conversation with the sellers, after about 2 weeks, I said, hey, I think I have a buyer for you and I'll be the buyer. Pending we could structure a deal that, I think kind of handicaps my downside, but it'll uncap the upside for all of you for some period of time. And so the sellers, it was actually three of them, and kind of backing into why I thought that this platform made the most sense. So from a macro perspective, the industry was ripe for consolidation, right? Very much fragmented. There's kind of three big players at the top to control 90-95% of the market space. Um,
Wow.
and you figure if there's 8,000 or so security companies, 7,900 of which do less than $4 million of revenue, so they're generally pretty kind of local in scope. But with
Yeah.
that being said, if there was someone who could come into the industry and not only look to consolidate, but have a very kind of people first, kind of approach to the business, since it's a labor intensive business, I thought that you could win, right? And I think the industry was fairly archaic when it came down to a technology standpoint. It was very much kind of master servant like when it came down to a leadership standpoint, and so we wanted to come in and disrupt that and help people kind of transition from having jobs to having kind of long term careers. And so the way that the previous founders spoke about their employees and spoke about why they were so, kind of hesitant to selling the company to just about anybody really did lend a light to how much they cared about their team, right? And I think that's important when you're coming in and making an acquisition or being the new person into an organization, because if the employees within the organization have been taken care of historically, generally it's going to be a lot easier to kind of help create and fall within that culture because they have somewhat of an established positive culture. So I thought that
Hmm.
this was a phenomenal opportunity to be able to come into an organization and really understand it and grow it. And like I said, the sellers decided that they would stay on board as well, as advisors. So we were all able to kind of row the boat in the same direction.
That's powerful. It's oftentimes they, sail off into the sunset after an acquisition, but they stayed along and helped you. That's super helpful.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned culture there. So, PPS, we talked before, like one of the largest minority owned security firms in the country. What does that mean to you? And like, how does that influence your leadership or maybe the culture?
Yeah, I think for me personally, as we think about being a minority owned and operated enterprise, I think so oftentimes in our as in the minority community, your North Star tends to be in, let's call it, sports, entertainment, and other kind of like industries, right? And that's not disparaging against those industries. I think that there is a pathway to be immensely successful in it. But I think the notion here is that there are many other industries that are generally overlooked by minority companies or minority communities that you can do just as well in or even better in, right? And so I think with that, our organization, we've grown and scaled to this size because we work hard, we have grit, we are very much service oriented. It's I'm a big fan of meritocracy, right? And I want to ensure
Mm.
that we scale and grow because we provide a service that is better than competitors out there, right? And so I think, as we think about, you know, being positioned as one of the largest minority owned companies in the United States, I think it's really a bow to our team, and really that's kind of how we structure our culture. Is that, hey, nothing is given, everything is earned, right? And when we think about how we're going to continue to scale, we have to always be mindful that every day you have to earn the right to be able to service a client, right? It's not
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
you're giving it for one reason or another, because of a designation, because of a corporate ideology. It's nothing like that. It's because we service people much better than other organizations will. We listen to our clients. We're very kind of forward thinking as we think about growth. And I think that's something that we want to kind of hang our hats on and ensure that even future generations are able to look at it in the same way, right? And look at industries that are, let's call it, underrepresented, whether you think about plumbing, HVAC, whether you think about any of these industries that are not as glamorous, so to speak. You can grow at scale pending you have a service that is superior to that's in a market.
this is sort of off topic, but you mentioned like, having to earn it every day. And we talked earlier about like you played wide receiver in college. And my prior business partner and I used to say all the time, like we always wanted to hire former athletes because they understood the work that goes into it, right? Like, the delayed gratification, practice, structure, like just working hard, having to earn it. Cause if you don't, somebody else is going to take your spot. Like, how do you see that parallel? Like, do you have that same view where you want to hire former athletes because they understand what it takes?
It doesn't necessarily have to be former athletes per se, but I do think that there
Yeah.
is a mindset that tends to there's a mindset of people that we hire that tends to be found in athletes, former athletes, right? And it's
Yeah.
competitors, people who don't take things for granted. It's you know people who really are scrappy or entrepreneurial in nature, right? And
Hmm.
want more, right? And I think athletes that mindset is pretty consistent because you want to win, and every day you want to win. It's like I played college and I played football in college, and depending on what Saturday it is, I mean, you could be the number one team in the nation playing against a team that's unranked, and you still may lose if you don't show up, with your A game,
Right.
right? And so,
Yep.
I think that's kind of how we look at it. I came to this organization in 2021. This organization has been around since, let's call it 2011, and we've scaled to be, within the top 25 security companies by revenue in the United States, right? And there was a point where there was somebody within that top 25 that's no longer there, right? And we've displaced them, and other organizations displaced them, and that's because they may or may not have become complacent, right? And so
Right.
I would say for us, there's probably another kind of scrappy organization who's clawing their way to the top, right? And I think that we have to be
Hmm.
very mindful of that. That in order for us to remain relevant, I mean, we have to always embody this mindset that we're lucky to have customers as opposed to customers are lucky to have us.
I couldn't agree more. It's that I think of it like servant leadership, but it's kind of the same thing. Like you're serving your clients. You mentioned you've scaled tremendously since you came there. Just for context, how many employees did you have, or how big was the team when you started, and how many employees do you have now?
Yeah, when we started, I mean, we were somewhere around 80 or so employees. I mean, now we're
Hmm.
north of 500 or so employees. So, I mean, we've scaled. I mean, part of which is, we had clients who brought a lot of work in house. We made a few kind of strategic acquisitions as well, and then we've diversified our customer ranks pretty rapidly. And as we diversified our customer ranks, then obviously in the service business, that means you have to hire to service those customers. And so a
Hmm.
lot of our growth has been kind of organic and making sure that we bring the right people into the organization to kind of fuel that growth.
That's awesome. And so, I mean, that's a pretty big jump in terms of the size of the organization. What does that what does that mean in terms of how you keep what kind of systems do you have to keep people aligned, hold them accountable, make sure everybody's rowing? You mentioned like rowing in the same direction towards your goals. How do you organize and keep everybody moving?
Yeah, I mean, we have a field service model, operationally speaking. So our operations team, for all intents and purposes, is the manufacturing plant of our organization, right? I mean, our sales, obviously, they generate leads, they kind of build those relationships, but our operations team is really what kind of keeps the boat, going, right? And so with that being said, you have to kind of figure out, depending on your structure, but you have to figure out a way to empower your people, your field people, to make decisions, right? And
Hi, if you're a CEO out there who's struggling with focus for your company, aligning your team, accountability, if you're struggling with execution, connecting the dots from where you're at to where you want to be, we've got a great program for you here at MAP. My name is Michael Cato. I'm the CEO. Most importantly, I was a client for 15 years, sold my company to a public company, and then bought MAP so that we can help other entrepreneurs with this specific problem. We're a 60-year-old company. We've worked with 170,000 individual executives and CEOs. We've worked with 15,000 organizations. This is what we do. Click the link below to learn a little bit more about how people just like you, CEOs, have transformed their business and ultimately transformed their life by running through the MAP system.
That's so powerful. So you've got, okay, so you have annual meetings. Is that where do you guys have like a structured annual planning process where you're setting forth the goals for the next year?
Yep, precisely.
And then we talk about like the rhythms a lot for a business. How does that break down throughout the year? Do you have like quarterly meetings, monthly meetings with your teams? How do you make sure that like, hey, we set this goal to grow, I don't know, from 10 million to 50 million or 50 million to 100 million? Are we on track? Are we not on track? Like, what do those rhythms look like in your company?
Yeah, I mean, it's not to say that we over meet, right? I think we have some very intentional meetings. So, of course, we have kind of check-in calls on a weekly basis, right, with various
Okay.
departments. We have one meeting with our entire kind of, senior leadership team that happens every Friday so that we understand exactly how we perform that week. And then every quarter, we have a quarterly business review, right? And so
Mm.
that quarterly business review, we look at everything that has transpired in the previous quarter, and then what the pathway is going forward. There's probably about 25 or so percent of our time focusing on everything that has already occurred, and the other
Yeah.
75% of our time is really focusing on kind of a forward-looking approach, right? Because there's not a whole lot that you can do about everything that's occurred. It's primarily about what
Mm-hmm.
you're going to do moving forward. From let's call it an operational or financial review perspective, we do have meetings on that every month, right? And so,
Okay.
that is generally where we're meeting with our kind of board and kind of lending community, kind of going through, you know, debt coverage ratios and those type of performance measures. But
Mm-hmm.
as it pertains to kind of a multi-hour meeting, let's call it, 3-4 hour meeting, that takes place in our quarterly business reviews.
Okay. Okay. And then you said the monthly meeting was more of that was just the check-in for the leadership team?
No, the monthly meeting is more so like an operational and financial kind of understanding all of our
Mm.
ratios, right?
Okay.
Want to ensure that you're not over levered, want to ensure that your EBITDA, trailing 12 months EBITDA is performing as you had budgeted, et cetera, right? So that's more kind of financially focused. Our
Yep.
weekly meetings with our team is really with our back office team, as well as our strategy team, as well as our HR team, as well as our operations, to talk about what happened that week, right? And talk about,
Okay.
new customers that may be coming on, new sites that may be coming on,
Yeah.
cash position, any type of hangups that we're having, from a cross-functional communication standpoint. So it's more kind of real.
Yeah. Tactical. Yeah. Yeah. Is this weekly, monthly, quarterly cadence? Is that something you brought over from a prior experience or prior company, or yeah, how did that originate?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked a bit in restructuring, right? And,
Mm.
I think when you work in restructuring, you tend to have a number of meetings to keep everybody on the same page to ensure that,
Mm-hmm.
the company continues to operate and can return value to shareholders, et cetera. And so I think we brought a lot of that sort of cadence and rigor from restructuring into, a company that is performing at a high level, because we never want to get to a point where we have to restructure, right? And so we just brought that same type of rigor and structure to the organization to ensure that we were always constantly aligned. Everybody was aware of everything that was happening within the organization and how we could support one another.
Okay, that's great. So as you guys have grown, because you've grown significantly, I mean, sometimes that brings complexity. Like, are there any challenges that have come up, whether it's with the managers or leadership or process, and how do you go about addressing them?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think as depending, again, it depends on your culture, right? I think for us, we really hone on the idea that we have an entrepreneurial culture, right? And so we want to hire entrepreneurs, want to hire leaders, or at least people with an entrepreneurial mindset. And so we empower people to therefore make decisions. We want to be very nimble. We want to be able to, pivot very quickly. And I think with scale, at times you have to become bureaucratic in some capacities. Like, you don't want to be overly bureaucratic, but you have to have some element of checks and balances and some elements of control that, it didn't really exist before. And so it's kind of a very fine line that you're balancing, right? And that's part of the reason that we have, these weekly meetings to understand, hey, where are there barriers? Where are there obstacles? Where are there kind of bottlenecks within cross-functional communication to where we can't make a decision,
Yeah.
right? And to, what's happening within our team, right? We incentivize everybody in our organization to spend time in the field. I mean, and that's, from as low as the CEO to as high as, kind of the staff people within the organization, right? I mean, we have a kind of inverted hierarchy, and so that's why I say as low as the CEO, because my role is very much to serve everybody in the organization. And
I thought you had said that by mistake at first.
no, it's my role is very much to serve everybody in the organization and to kind of remove obstacles that prevent them from being successful, right? I mean, if you really look at it, if you really look at it, they could not probably, this organization would continue whether I'm here or not, right? Now, if they all left, this organization would not continue. So they are far more
right.
than I am. But going back to your initial question, I think it's very important to figure out, how do you maintain the culture and the way that you all have operated that have gotten you to the point where you are, right? I think oftentimes we kind of lose sense of that with scale. And I think for us, that's why we have so many touch points within the organization. And that's why I think the biggest challenge is kind of staying firm on like your core values as an organization, right? And when I say staying firm, I'm not alluding to not evolving or not adapting with an industry, right? But there are values that have gotten you to scale, and presumably that those are the same values that you hire for, those are the same values that you service your customers around, and you should not lose track of that, right? And I think for us, with scale, it's been a bit more challenging because one of our values is to be very entrepreneurial, right? And with scale, that creates barriers or obstacles at times, that creates bureaucracy at times, right? Where we never really had to operate that way when we were much smaller. And so that's why we have so many touch points within our organization, and everybody's incentivized to spend time in the field, et cetera, so that we can constantly have kind of these temperature gauges of, hey, how are people feeling? Do people have the resources that they need to be successful? Are people developing in the ways that they feel fulfilled, right? And having those types of conversations and trying to figure out ways to give people stretch assignments, et cetera. But that's all something that you have to be very intentional about, ensuring that you kind of maintain that culture.
You mentioned managing or developing people, and I think, people want to feel that they're invested in and they're progressing, right? Especially if you're hiring, people that are ambitious, entrepreneurial, competitive, they want to feel like they're moving forward. They're not just complacent or stagnant. How do you go about, and you were talking about like your regional managers. What we find is that many people may be great individual contributors, skilled technicians, but maybe lack managerial skills, leadership skills. And so our whole business is all about training them and giving them the tool sets and the trainings that they can become exceptional leaders and exceptional managers. How do you go about that? Is that a challenge for you guys? Or how do you go about making sure that the people that you're putting in place in different regions really do have the tool sets that they need to lead and be amazing leaders and managers?
Yeah, look, I think that when we think about development, and again, kind of going back to this whole notion of empowering people, we do push for people to be very much self-aware, right? And with that, for our development plans, people create their own development plans, right? It's not my job or your manager's job or anybody else to develop you into who they want you to be, right? I think you have to truly reflect on where you want to be within your career, right? What things do you do well? What things don't you do well, or opportunities? What things do you want more exposure to? What things do you want less exposure to? Do you like leading a team? Do you like being an individual contributor? And having that conversation. And once you come forth with that information, then it's your manager's job to kind of fill in the gaps, right? So if your whole idea is that, hey, I want to lead people, take on more responsibility, et cetera, now your manager can say, okay, these are kind of where the gaps and the challenges have been in order to get there. These
Mm-hmm.
are some kind of stretch assignments or goals that I think, may be worthwhile to kind of help you bridge where you ultimately want to go. Do you agree? Do you not agree? What other thoughts do you have that, we could look at from kind of an action based kind of development plan that we could add to it? And so it's very kind of collaborative, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's how we really do encourage our team, so that, you know, there's never a point, and I say never, I'm using that in a very loose sense, right? There's never a point where somebody's in a role that they should not be in, or they didn't want to be in, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think anytime somebody's in a role, it's because we've had collectively group conversations to get you to that point. We've had people on our team who, I mean, we feel would be tremendous leaders or people managers, right? But they say, hey, look, where I am in my life, I don't want more responsibility, right? And you respect that, right? It's like,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it, you know, you don't have to be a people manager to be a leader, right? Like, you can still lead and be an individual contributor. There are things that you can bring to the table. You can be very innovative in your approach. You can, you can take initiative, right? There's a lot of things that you could do, but that doesn't mean you have to be leading a team of people, right? And some people, that's what they aspire, right? And so it's really understanding what motivates people, and that starts with them understanding what motivates them.
I couldn't agree more. I think oftentimes people feel that natural progression is, hey, I'm really good at this job. I should be a manager. I guess that's next. But not everybody should be a manager. Not everybody wants to be a manager.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, you mentioned being self-aware. It's tough because not everybody is. And sometimes you have these blind spots, right? Which in the workshop we do, there's this really cool 360-degree feedback. There's this process where like you collect that, and it's oftentimes really helpful and eye-opening, right? Because you're getting that from not only from people your if there's managers above you, but also your peers, and just whether that's your colleagues or sometimes vendors. Really, really helpful just to get that, be like, oh, you're right, man. I do need to work on, I don't know, my communication or XYZ things, that can sometimes open the doors to, okay, I got to work here. This is what I need to improve.
Yep. I agree, and love 360 feedbacks. I think there's one thing that, you almost have to kind of preface with 360 feedbacks, right? And kind of condition people to be very objective, right? And not, be emotionally charged one way or another, right? And be very, very specific on the feedback they're giving, but as you're receiving the feedback, right, really looking at it from, how can I develop from this, as opposed to taking it personal, because generally it's not personal. It's, hey, trying to help you grow, right? And
Right.
Perception is reality. So no matter what your intent was, that may not be how it was perceived by your peers, your clients, your managers, etc. And so now it's up to you to figure out, how do you kind of evolve or develop around what the feedback you've been given.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, you're totally right. Okay, so when you look at the next few years for PPS, I don't know, 3 years or so, what do you have as goals for the business, and what do you think might get in the way?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's still continuing to scale through service, right? I mean, we're looking at acquiring a few other security firms, and kind of adding fuel to our inorganic growth strategy. But again, it's not a private equity approach of just, hey, doing it with volume and acquiring as many companies as we can. It's ensuring that we're acquiring companies who share the same values and operate very similarly to us, and care about service in the same way that we do. But again, I think as we kind of build out the organization, I think the thesis is still the same: to be able to help people transition from just having jobs to having careers, right? And that's the whole purpose, at least for me personally, of scaling, right? Is being able to find a pathway or create a pathway for people to have that freedom that they never thought they could, in an industry that was historically kind of, there was a ceiling with most companies, right? Especially if they're small in scope. It may be a family run business. It may be, the business, the ceiling has already been set. And so what we're looking to do is continue to grow and scale and look at other verticals and other service offerings that allow for people to come in and say, okay, well, I know I started off in sales. I may want to go to marketing. I may want to go to HR. I may want to, remain in HR for the entirety of my career, but I want to ensure that I'm able to, grow vertically within the organization and kind of go from there. And so I think it's continuing to figure out how do we grow in specific markets, and how do we, provide value to our employees, right? And if we provide value to our employees, then we provide value to our customers.
Okay. We tend to ask most of our guests this question: if you could when looking at your business today, if you could wave a wand and change or optimize one part of it, what would that be?
Optimize one part of it. I'm always going to probably lean into the people aspect of it, right? And so if you're kind of breaking things up in the people, process, and technology, I think, the more that you can make people efficient, effective, develop people, et cetera, then the people are going to be your asset that will solve your technology and your process issue, right? And so any investment for us, I think if I could wave a magic wand, it's to ensure that people are taken care of. It's to ensure that people are fulfilled, people are happy, people are doing what they want to do. For the sake that you have to work, you should enjoy what you're doing, right? And so, we want to be a purpose-driven organization. And so with that, we want to ensure that the people who are spending generally more time here than they are with their loved ones, are able to effectively enjoy what they're doing, and therefore, able to, pay it back into the company.
Okay. I think it all starts with people having the best people on your team and building that culture. I didn't get a chance to ask it earlier. And before we wrap, I do want to ask, how are you thinking about AI and technology, weaving that into how you guys operate? Is that an efficiency play? Is that an expansion play? How are you guys thinking about that?
I think it's both, right? I think, in an industry where there's already a labor shortage, right? Like, you have to weave technology and AI and the likes, to drive efficiency. It's not a replacing labor play for us. It's figure out how do you do more with less, right? And there aren't a lot of entrants into the industry with that being said. And so we have to figure out how do we still, satisfy our customers with the resources that we have. And so where do we invest those? Now, I think the other side of the coin is you have some clients who may not have the P&L or the budget for the labor side of the business, right? But they still want to ensure that their patrons feel safe, their facilities are safe, their employees feel safe and stem attrition. And so, the value for them may be, hey, what technology resources do you have? And so, yeah, it's expanding and being able to provide services to, end clients who may not like our core business model. So yes, on the expansion side, but then I think at our core, it's, figuring out how to drive efficiency with, expanding our core business.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time today, man. Before we wrap up, where can folks go to learn more about PPS, or perhaps you, and connect with you?
Yeah, look, LinkedIn, I think everybody has a LinkedIn these days. And so you could find me as Raleigh Taylor. Our website is premierprotective.com. So you can reach out or peruse through our website there. And yeah, I'd love to connect and learn more from your audience, and any way that I can help contribute to what they're building. I'd love to have the conversation.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate your time. Congratulations on the success. And I'm sure you guys are going to keep growing. Sounds like you've got a great organization. So thank you again. And thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you next time.